everybody. Well, let me stand up because everybody, like all the moderators, they stand up and they talked like very well. So I want to do the same thing. So thank you, Steps, SF, Jeremiah, and Ray, the whole team for having me again this year. It's an honor to be here. And today, I'll be moderating this panel. So my name is Gabriela de Queiroz. I am a founder of F02 Labs, where I help startups stand out and scale, driving product adoption and visibility through developer advocacy, technical strategy, and community building. I used to be a director of AI at Microsoft, work on open source with IBM, worked for a bunch of startups, have been working with a lot of startups. And today we are going to be talking about scaling enterprise AI from data bottlenecks to deployment. So as enterprises move from pilot or prototype to production, the challenges, they shift from data bottlenecks to governance, performance, and trust. And we are here to actually learn from you all these issues that you have faced heads-on. So I have the pleasure of having Anand and David joining me today. I would love for you to do a quick intro of yourself first.
Hi, I'm Anand Vallamsetla. I'm the founder of Resilience AI. We're building resilience for life through AI with AI-based psych education and therapy. I have 25 years of software engineering experience at companies like Google, and I've taught thousands of Berkeley executives on AI business impact.
All right, thanks, Gabriela. Hi, everyone. David Hefter from BlackRock. I spent my whole career at BlackRock, over 2 decades, aging myself here. And I have an AI-dedicated role focused on our internal use of AI at BlackRock. So we're a large investment shop, and I specifically focus on our use of AI within the investment process. So how can we use AI to make better investment decisions?
So let's start by grounding this conversation. So we heard from panelists, from speakers today, and we all know this, but we often hear that moving from pilot to production is where most of AI projects fail. So from your perspective, what is the biggest overlooked challenge enterprise face when scaling AI? And I will start with David.
Yeah, I think we'll get into different parts of this as we go. So I'll just start with, so far, the way that people have interacted with AI has mostly been through chatbots. And so until we get to the point where agents are prevalent and just everywhere, or they're baked into software that we're already using, or various things, the act of going to a chatbot, like regardless of how you built it or you bought it, whatever you did, that's a big challenge for adopting AI, frankly, because people have to change behavior, just like any new technology. But AI is so new to all of us, and I know lots of populations love AI and go to it quite easily, but in the corporate world, it is a challenge. And besides your subset of super users, it's a real hurdle.
How about you, Anand?
Yeah, if you look at the Pareto's rule, 80-20 rule, it takes only 20% of the effort to build the 80% of the product. But last 20% takes 80% of the effort. So that's where the small startups to big companies, you see a lot of failures in terms of efficacy of the models. Many of the models, they work in pilots, but they fail miserably in production because they do not capture all the real world scenarios or edge cases. So that's one of the challenges that,
Yeah, and one of the things, we talk a lot about models and all the challenges, but we don't talk as often, in my opinion, about data. And at the heart of any AI system is the data. So as enterprise scale, the data stops from being an asset and starts becoming a bottleneck. I think we all know this. So issues like scarcity, bias, labeling costs, synthetic data, everything can slow everything down, right? So Anand, what has been the most expensive bottleneck in healthcare, and how have we seen leaders address it?
Yeah, That's a great question. So data and information are different. Information is organized data. From information, you get insight. You have what we have today is a lot of siloed data and low quality data. That's why it becomes very expensive to clean it up and do that process. What we need is information that captures all the real world scenarios and the edge cases. So the three things that many of the companies in healthcare they would do is first, you can actually have synthetic information sets that you can train on different real-world scenarios and edge cases. Second is to start with transformative learning. Start with the pre-trained models and fine-tune for your use cases. The third one is synthetic data partnership, secure partnership with others, where you can share de-identified data you can work with. There is one important use case that I've seen at Google where they solve the data problem very uniquely. Does anybody remember Project Loon, the balloon for the Wi-Fi? The challenge to solve data is not to have more data, it's actually less data. So I'll explain that. The models, the architectures that we are building today is called bottom-up approach. You start with the data, information, intelligence. That's bottom-up. The new architecture that Loon has actually used is called top-down approach. They actually taught how to think. That way you don't provide a lot of data, you actually provide intelligence to it. So the balloons were able to manipulate themselves very easily under high critical conditions. So I would say that what we are going to see in the future is more top-down approach architectures, as many of the people alluded that transformers are going to be reaching some limits.
And then, David, you work in finance, which I'm sure there is a similar perspective as well. So, like, how do you balance, like, having a lot of data, but then having sensitive data in the creation of all these AI applications?
Yeah, I mean, a big part of making investment decisions is filtering the noise from the true insights. So that's where AI can actually come in. And you could even train an AI model based on your own take on that. So constantly we're doing write-ups as investors on what matters. And so that could be our training data. You have an earnings call, and then you take the research analyst write up from that earnings call, and you have the input and you have the output, and you use that as training data. But I'll just extend it further. Like historically, I think financial shops have done a great job of handling data, but it's been quantitative data, and what LLMs really unlock is the ability to deal with qualitative data, text data, documents, and that's where it often starts from a disorganized place. So that's the big effort for, I think, a lot of shops, is to organize your unstructured data in a way to make it useful to AI in this new world. But the great opportunity there is once you combine the qualitative data with the quantitative data, you've really captured it all, and the impact is endless.
So you touched a little bit about the synthetic data, and this synthetic data space has been getting a lot of traction lately. And one of the companies that I'm going to mention is like guardrails.ai. I worked a little bit with them, and they got acquired by NVIDIA. They created the whole synthetic data department inside NVIDIA. So where have you found most valuable to have this synthetic data, and is there any limit on relying on it in your experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I was working in Google Cloud data center construction, we have a need to identify different trucks and the construction workers. But there is not a lot of data available out there. So we had to create the synthetic data to mimic different trucks, different environments and settings for that. Without that, we couldn't even have finished our project. So that's one of the great use cases where you don't have readily available information. However, one thing that you have to remember is whenever you introduce data, you're already introducing bias. So you have to be very careful about what kind of bias you're introducing into the system. So that's one of the things. Another one that I allude to other speakers, when you use a lot of synthetic data, they're talking about modal collapse. So that's another thing that you have to take into consideration as well.
Cool. And both of you are in these very regulated industries, finance and healthcare. And we are going to change a little bit into privacy compliance and governance. And enterprise wrestles a lot with all the regulation, GDPR, CCPA, HIPAA, et cetera. But it's not like checking the boxes, right? So it shapes how we design and deploy systems and AI system. And David, you are chair of AI governance committee. What does an effective governance look like in practice?
Yeah, so I mean, governance is a very important thing that I think all enterprises are worried about with AI and trying to figure out. And a lot of times when you go to implement your first use case, you quickly realize that, hey, we forgot about all the governance steps needed. So we've adopted an extensive governance program. It started with just bringing together our senior leaders in kind of like the governance type fields of legal, compliance, risk, information security. It's kind of a boring topic to talk about, but it is so important. You have to be aware of all the regulations that exist out there, even though we're not in a regime of high regulation. There is still stuff out there. The European AI Act was talked about before by Decai. And separate from regulations, though, there's an opportunity to use governance to your advantage. It is a way to kind of see everything that's happening within your organization. When you get, if you're of a sizable organization like BlackRock, where there's a lot of different AI builds going on, or even vendor purchases, governance is like the one single place where all that gets funneled through. So that's a keen advantage, because there could be duplicative work out there, but also a lot of learnings from just what other people are doing. So I kind of look at it of like, what do you get out of having the governance process that helps you out from managing AI at the strategy level overall.
And Anand, with your work on healthcare, we know that there is a lot of like compliance and regulation. You live under HIPAA. How do you innovate under heavy regulation without slowing the progress?
Yeah. So you cannot, you can build prototypes and say, okay, I have built a great system. Now let's talk about HIPAA. That doesn't work that way. So you have to start with HIPAA day one. You have to start with the secure data management practices. You have to think about de-identification of the data. You can get a lot of that AI intelligence with de-identified data itself. You don't need identified information for building these things. And including encryption, end-to-end encryption is another way. Third one is basically you continuously monitor for privacy issues in real time. And also in HIPAA world, it's more about not just accessing the data, it's about who has access to the data. Why did they access the data? So it's a lot of training involved for the people so that they can be HIPAA compliant business associates so that they can get access to the data. Finally, AI is there. AI can be used as a tool for compliance itself. There are more AI compliance tools that are coming in the market that can be used as compliance tools.
Yeah, so you touch on a lot on the governance side, and that defines or helps us define what is possible. But when you have the data, even when you have the data and the green lights, the real test, and I'm going to talk about this again, the real test is when models meets the messy reality of the production system. So we talk about vibe coding, we talk about prototyping, but you only know if your app, if your product is going to work is when it goes to production, it goes into all the messiness that we have in production. So let's talk a little bit about what it takes to achieve performance at this enterprise level. And the other piece that we talk about in the AI world is around benchmarks. And benchmarks in the lab, where we see a lot of times don't always hold up in production. So enterprise need models that are tuned, validated, and resilient under stress. At BlackRock, for example, what does it take for an AI solution to be deployment ready?
Yeah, this is a big one. I think this is why enterprises have really struggled is AI is beautiful because you could create a prototype so quickly. That's like the vibe coding discussions that we've had here before. But to do it at scale, that's something that Replit is one of the vibe coding companies focused on doing specifically. But you have all sorts of existing challenges with software development, data, and security being a couple of them, and then new challenges with AI around you don't get the same answer twice, you have hallucinations. So those create unique challenges, and the way to kind of scale that up and get comfortable with it is, again, going back to boring type stuff, but it's just hard work that you need to do, which is really evaluations and guardrails. You put in the evaluations, you spend a lot of time doing that, you have to come up with different scenarios, different use cases, really test it out, and it's a continuous thing. It's not a one and done. And then having guardrails in place. One of the common guardrails we deal with is do not give financial advice. You want to make sure your AI is not going to do that, whether it's an internal use case or an external use case. But so you put those in place, and then you could achieve scale. But it also depends on what the final use of this particular production build is for. So if it's for informational purposes only, then you have a little bit more leeway. As investors, we're constantly flooded with information from someone we see on TV, some journalists that we're reading about, all sorts of things, and we have to make our own judgment as investors to take that as truth or not, to double check it, to investigate it, to challenge it. And it's the same with AI. But if it's a systematic process that you're building AI into, then you have to treat it a bit differently, and you have to have even further controls in place and do more testing.
Yeah, so in healthcare, we see a lot of like pushback on the AI side. Either like they are not ready to implement AI on their system, or they don't trust. So how do you close this trust gap with stakeholders when you are introducing AI into healthcare systems, for example?
Yeah, in software world, the trust actually comes down to only two things. One, the system. The second one is the people. So when you talk about systems, you have to be able to explain what this AI system does, what it is, what's its purpose, how does it work, most importantly, what are its limitations. You have to understand that. That's part one of the system. Part two of the system is explainability. If a system outputs can be explained, then doesn't matter. It can be explained to clinicians, or the patients, or the other stakeholders. You can have the beautiful AI system, but nobody's going to trust it. That's the system part. The second part is the people part, trust. So you have to continuously involve technical and non-technical stakeholders all the way from the beginning. Planning, testing, rollout, and everything. Because people can make it happen or make it break, right? The most important one that I've seen in healthcare specifically is called human in the loop. So the famous author said, you cannot have accountability for a software system. There has to be accountability in healthcare. So, for example, in radiology, you can have radiology can give analysis, as David mentioned, it's only informational purpose. It can do the analysis and everything. The AI system can do it, but you have the radiologist at the end, human in the loop, do the final check and tell you. The simplest example is, the thing is, you can build AI systems in healthcare for more false positives. For example, you can say, this person has cancer, and have human in the loop check it, revalidate it, and do it. If you do the other way, it's more dangerous. You cannot tell the person that you don't have cancer when they do have a cancer. So you build systems for more false positives and human in the loop. That's the best way to get the trust in the system.
So we have so many topics that we kind of like touched on high level, and I wanted to touch on all these different aspects because they are so important, especially when we are talking about enterprise, bottlenecks, deployment, etc. So we talked about data, we talked about governance, we talked about human in the loop, performance, trust, but behind all of this, there is the strategy. And how organizations set priorities and align with business goals. And I want to take a step back and look at the bigger picture, which is strategy. And I'm going to start with David, and that was something that I was very interested in knowing more, is like, how do you define a successful AI strategy, and how do you make sure that the AI initiatives are aligned with business goals and not just technology experiments?
Yeah, I think this is a big one. Just because of the pace of change that we're living in with AI, one, it's a journey. All of us are on a journey and at different places in that journey. Different enterprises are at different stages of either early days, maybe we're hesitant at first, or quite advanced. But with the pace of change, whatever strategy you have to be constantly assessing it and reevaluating it because things keep evolving. So it's important to reflect on the latest capabilities. And so to define a strategy, you even just have to understand AI, how it works, and what others are doing in the space. This is so new to all of us, and events like this are great to just engage and see. I mean, 70 startups out there, like seeing what they're all working on, that's one way to stay in touch with the latest and greatest of what's going on. And then from there, it's a matter of basically a bunch of factors of how do you build support for what you're going to try to achieve, how do you prioritize, how do you decide buy versus build. So you want to make sure you have top-down support. You want to enable the bottom-most levels of your organization to do what they feel is needed. So give them tools, give them the runway to operate, because some of your best ideas and best use cases come from there. But with the top-down support, ideally your leaders are using AI themselves and showing that to everyone. And you're encouraging the use of AI, and you're not setting people up to be fearful that it'll replace their jobs. So there's all sorts of dynamics there. From a prioritization standpoint, you can use an ROI framework. I think you need kind of a mixture of an ROI framework where you go after the highest value use cases, but then also allow for other things to kind of happen more naturally. Because there's just so much that could go on at once. You don't want to necessarily limit yourself to just a small number of use cases. And back to the idea that the pace is changing so quickly. So your power users are going to stay up to speed with that pace of change, and you're going to want to stay close to your power users. So there's a lot that goes into this. The buy versus build decision is important. Larger enterprises are going to have the capability to build some things on their own. A lot of that's going to be at the application layer where they're not necessarily building a model themselves. So from there, a lot of your existing software developers, if you have them at your org, they want to work on AI projects. So again, you got to enable them. You got to give them productive ways to direct that energy so they're building things that are aligned with your priorities. And then from a build perspective, it's important to have a good buy perspective. It's important to have a good buy strategy because there's a lot of things that you don't want to build. You have, if you're not a law firm, you probably don't want to be building a legal AI solution because that's not your area of expertise. Someone could do it better than you. Also, some of these, going back to the pace of change, it's hard to be building in-house and keeping up to the latest and greatest versus a dedicated startup where that's all that they do. So you have to consider all that and be thoughtful of where do you have proprietary data and proprietary builds that you can do versus where should you stay clear and just go with a startup out there. And then even in the startup community, you have to be smart of which are the best startups, which ones to work with. A year ago, every startup is unclear who the winners were going to be. Now some of the winners are starting to show up, and from an enterprise offering perspective, and so you could kind of take better bets of going with some AI startups out there. But it keeps evolving quickly. It's smart to also partner with these startups and influence their direction as well as how they're building to best suit your needs. So I know that was a lot, but it takes a lot.
That was great. And I'm going off script a little bit here because you mentioned, now we are seeing some winners in this space, but it's still like we see a lot of noise and it's very crowded. It's a very crowded space right now, especially here in the Bay Area, in this bubble. And a question for both of you. What do you think is like the things that a startup should be doing to stand out and differentiating themselves from the rest?
Yeah, it's hard. It is a crowded space. Some verticals more than others. You want to have good talent. So if you don't have talent that's going to impress your customers, then try to go out and get good talent. For me, I want to see people that have strong AI chops, that didn't just, like anyone who didn't start it just recently. Anyone that's got some history of AI is more likely to have good AI chops. You need to have a strong customer base. We don't want to be the first customer of any startup. I know every startup needs a first customer. So you have to be strategic in terms of how you build up your customer base. Start with smaller customers, smaller sized companies, so you could start building that up. And then from there, it depends on how it goes. But it's a totally like flipped dynamic where it used to be the more employees you have, the more confidence I have in your ability to be sustainable. But in this day and age, startups are going much farther with fewer employees. So I've downweighted that metric. Similar with funding amounts as well. So it's quite interesting. It makes it harder. And you have to just really be differentiated from your competitors. You have to understand your competitors quite well. And if you're not staying on the cutting edge compared to them, then it's going to be hard to just to compete. The incorporation of reasoning models and tool calling has just been unbelievable. And so if you, like all the startups I was looking at just in the second half of last year, so not even a year ago, and then I go and look at them again in the first half of this year, they're like completely different companies if they're staying at the cutting edge, if they're building out with reasoning models and tool calling and all this stuff. So it's just good to know that like if you're not moving that quickly and adjusting to the latest, you're going to be lacking compared to your competitors.
How about you, Anand?
That's a great question. So startups have to figure out what their core competency is. So previously it used to be infrastructure used to be one of the core competency. Talent used to be one of those, right? For now, I think that's the cloud and everything has equalized that. The most important, the key core competency is going to be the domain expertise. If you're a startup, if you know your domain inside out and understand the problem of the customer and provide the right solution, and you have the right data to train the model, that is going to be the core competency that I think Andrew Ning said that recently as well. So I think the domain expertise is the key.
I think you forgot to mention, I'm sorry, I'm going to sell my fish here. you forgot to mention developer relations. So like, how do you reach the developers? If you are building something for developers, you need to have someone that is the face of the company, talking the same language as the developers, showing them how to use the product and driving product adoption. That's another very important piece. That's what I'm doing. But we have like almost 3 minutes left. And before we close and maybe have some time for questions, what is one trend or one emerging trend that excites you the most moving forward, or maybe that scares you the most moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, agents and vibe coding are the hot trends that everyone knows about, but I think they're the most exciting. I like the idea of a swarm of agents, the ability to, back to one of the discussions from the morning about how much compute costs. Like if compute was free, you could send out a ton of agents. You wouldn't have to do RAG. You could just have AI just read every document you have or something. So I think the ability to scale up agents in a big way could be huge. And then just from the past discussion, the vibe coding, like to unlock non-developers to be able to build is just super powerful. So I know those are kind of the common answers, but I think they're just huge opportunities.
Yeah, for me, I will talk specifically about healthcare. It's about personalized healthcare. Your cell phone being able to connect with all your devices, your glucose monitors, your heart rate monitors, rings or watches. And first step is going to be understanding the data, converting that into information, converting that information to knowledge, insight, and giving actionable insights for you to work on. And say, hey, by the way, you're feeling stressed out. Why don't you take a breath? Do a deep breath exercise right now. I think I'm more excited about that, actually using the data that is continuously coming out of you're generating the data every day, every minute, getting the actionable insight out of it in the moment. I think that is going to be revolutionary.
Thank you. I don't think we have any more time for questions. I want to make sure that we have the pitch coming up and the last thing for tonight. So I want to thank you, David and Anand, for the amazing panel. Thank you all for coming today, and I hope to see you around.